Welcome to Power Up, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts, Nat and Kristen, as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. So today is a little bit different. We've got pep in our step because we are podcasting to you today as podcast award winners.
Yeah, we're the Olympian bronze medalists of, I wouldn't say gold, but we're bronze medalists of the podcast awards, which we are super stoked about. So unlike our usual selves that are low energy and hard to get any information out of us at all, hard to get us talking, today we will be absolutely chatting away because I'm super proud. Are you proud? I'm we were up against some big names. Like all the other winners are like, they have entire teams supporting those podcasts from what I could see.
As part of building a brand, I think there's always, awards is part of the strategy. You're being recognized, you're introduced to new audiences as a result. So we will take our bronze and we will slap that logo wherever we can.
Yeah. Independent judges have listened to the beautiful tones of our voice and decided that we are worthy of a medal. We don't actually get a medal, but we will, if you know anything about us at all, you know that we will create one for ourselves.
Yeah. They put up with our banter and cutting one another off, and they're like, yeah, they're worthy. So we recorded this episode live the other night at a fabulous live event, and there were fire engine sirens in the background, there was noise, there was clattering, we were in a bar. It was pretty intense. And so we thought we will do a retake. So welcome to those that are listening in that caught it the first time. And today is all about career curveballs. And we want to share 3 overlooked things that you can own when you're thrown a career curveball.
And that sounds like a bit of a tongue twister, a career curveball. Say it 3 times fast.
Career curveball, career curveball, career curveball. And you're not alone. We know that nearly half of us, 47%, will do a major career 180 by the time we hit 40. That's not always by our choice, by the way. Many of us have career curveballs inflicted upon us and therefore do a 180 in our careers. The average person changes jobs 12 times in their life.
That's quite a lot, eh? Is that companies as well, or is that promotions, or how does that work?
It's probably all of the above.
Yeah, that's so interesting, eh? Because I feel like a lot of us had parents who had jobs for life. That idea of you go into your career and you might stay at one company or organization for the whole time. And here we are now. It is a time of constant flux. The only certainty in work now is uncertainty, that this is the new normal, that we will expect to change jobs a lot. We will expect the kinds of jobs we do to change. And that can feel really, really stressful. But we like to see it as an opportunity in general. What can I do to take control of my career and take control of the things that can set me up for success, even when everything else feels out of our control?
Well, we like a good story split into 3, which is what we're doing. So number 1 is owning your story, even the messy parts. Number 2, crafting your story, making sense in the chaos. And number 3, telling your story because you're the main character. So let's start with owning your story.
Yeah, so we like this concept of gravity problems. And someone told us this a while ago and it really struck me. Gravity problems are the things that we can't control, just like gravity. The apple's going to fall from the tree. Gravity exists. You cannot stop that. And they often bring us down and you feel awful when you go through it. You feel like change has been thrust upon you. You feel probably you get stuck straight into that drama triangle. You are the victim or there is a villain. That is a fact when this stuff happens, right?
Yeah. And I can think of 2 experiences in my life. And when I tie the commonalities between them, it's because you have a picture of how things should be, because they're certainly how things could be. And you have a painted picture of the next step in whatever that pathway is. And for me, number 1 was a relationship. I was due to get married and I got an email from this other woman who said he'd been sleeping with her and I was literally, possibly going to marry this guy. The life that you're supposed to have no longer happens. The second time it happened to me, because things slow down, so I remember this unique experience, was when I was due to move my family in an acquisition of a startup. We were due to move to New York. I found the neighborhood the football school, the gymnastics school. My husband was going to get a visa and all work, and woke up to a press release saying that entire company's senior leadership team had been fired. So that's how I found out that life thing happened to me. And so in both those instances, so it was actually about experiencing the grief and all of the feelings that went along with, oh my gosh, this is so unfair, and why did this happen, and all this stuff, but not set up permanent residence there. Like ultimately, I just had to go through that process and then go, right, what's next? Dust myself off, because there are many other opportunities. It's just I hadn't considered them because, I was moving.
You had a plan. And I think the point of this step 1 on owning your story is actually sitting in those emotions until you've properly worked through them, because if you don't do that, they will stick around and haunt you. So please do have that meltdown. Please do go and vent and whine and do all the things. Whine sounds terrible, but like we do whine and it's great and you have to do that. This step sets you up to be able to take on the next couple of steps. So one of the things that I really liked reading about recently, or hearing about, which is Diary of a CEO, they had a brain scientist on, and I really loved this idea of ants. They talked about automatic negative thoughts, and especially when you've been through this massive life upheaval or work upheaval. And I like this concept of ants because they are thoughts, we all have them. And it's same as the 2 examples you gave. If you think there is one person alive who has not gone through a career curveball or a life curveball, you are sadly mistaken. It doesn't matter how much success you've had, how great things look on the outside. We have all been through some really drastic changes. So firstly, you're not alone, but that doesn't mean your experience is any less painful. So you get these negative thoughts, they pop in. What you really want to do is think about, what are the stories I'm telling myself? What are these ants crawling around in my brain, and how do I smash them? How do I start to address and get rid of these ants? Because and I love the analogy because I do actually imagine these little ants, and it makes it personified so you can actually tackle them, but you'll have those things. So tackle them.
We actually can rewire our brains during that process once we've sat in it long enough and ready to brush ourselves off. Not only is it a deliberate step that we need to take, but you can actually rewire your brains. And I was reading that it takes 63 days for new patterns to be charted in your brain. So if you start to smash those ants today, if you're listening to this podcast in December of 2024, we're talking new year, new me, where you're not letting that grief, trauma set up place in your brains anymore.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking at some examples of this, especially if you've had a curveball, it could be, I'll never find another job, or everyone's out to get me, and this awful manager, or whatever it is. Like those are all ants. Those are all negative thoughts that automatically appear when these things happen. So I love that idea of 63 days. And of course, therapy is for everyone. So just get the help you need in this stage, because it is worth actually dealing with it, because we all know people who fast forwarded through the stage and it comes back to bite you. One little action we have here, is it worth just jumping to the action?
Yeah.
Is we all have everyday happy places. Like we have places where we go to find comfort. And on day 1, it might be watching rom-coms on a couch. It might be sitting outside in the sun, or even just looking out a window. Could be going out for a walk somewhere nice. Everyday places that we can go to that kind of bring that peace and ability to work through things. So that would be the first action, is to identify one of those happy places and make a point of going there every day. Like for the next week, make sure you spend 5 to 10 minutes or more if you can in that happy place, to give yourself that opportunity to really work through those feelings.
Yeah, this is the owning the story. And what's your happy place, Nat?
Oh, I have so many. I'm a huge fan of you're influenced by things on Instagram, etc. I know that happens, so I try and surround myself with interesting things. So it's puppies. But also I've been following a few running influencers, because it just reminds me how going out for a jog is a happy place for me, like being outside, feeling fit and strong and healthy, and just going out and doing something like that. So I have made a note to do that today.
Yay! Amazing. Okay, we are going to move on to step 2, which is we've owned it, we've sat in it, and then we found our happy place. We've rewired our brains, new year, new me. And now it's time to craft we're in a good place. It's time to craft our stories. And this is about personal brand, which we've done quite a few pod eps on.
So what narrative do you want to share? And one of the examples I love on this is a power suitor told us a while ago she had flipped to being on the opposite side of a panel interview. She'd been asked to sit on a panel, And someone came in and they were really negative. They were really frustrated at how they left their last job. They were still in that owning their story stage. And because they hadn't worked through it, all of that slipped out in this interview. It just all came out at the wrong time. And so, of course, they didn't get the job. But also this power suitor was like, it was such a light bulb moment to see the impacts of not crafting your story around it, because it's like that bringing your whole self rather than your best self without putting that investment in. The narrative that comes out is negative, or it's blamey, or it's focused on everything other than what you're good at. And all of that stuff kind of comes into play.
Yeah, it's it's that classic, why did you leave that job? It's those hard questions that put you back in that place. The deliberate crafting your story is making sure that you have those professional responses at the ready that's got growth mindset, tackling opportunities. This is what I've learned. And I love this idea of a no fluff narrative. We know that we have very short attention spans and you've got 30 seconds to give someone an impression. Get back to the basics of who you are and get that across in a really short time. So I love this. No fluff narrative is getting clear on what problems do you solve, what makes you different, and what is your unusual combination of skills.
Yeah, and I also just like if you've had a career break, which a lot of people have, either from having children or you've lost your job and it's taken a lot longer than you anticipated to find one, which, by the way, again, you are not alone on. What is your narrative around that? Is it, I was in a position that I could wait for the exact right opportunities? Or is it, I've spent some time crafting my CV and getting really clear on what it is that I want to do? How do you tell the truth of what's happened, but in a light that really reflects well in that interview or when you're meeting that person or whatever? And having those answers ready mean you won't panic in the moment. You do not want to self-sabotage if you can avoid it. And you can do that by having a really lovely crafted story that you can take into those situations.
Yeah, and you probably should have something in your back pocket about why you moved on or lessons learned, and just test them on other people because, pretty critical.
And someone might even be nosy about the company or the organization. What happened there?
If we want to learn from anyone, listen to the politicians. I was listening to a politician who was in the old government be interviewed this morning on the radio, and it was about, blaming the current government or looking back at your administration. And it was so interesting how politicians just spin to what they want the audience to hear, which is, this is where we stand now, and this is what we think is best for the country. And you don't always have to answer the specific question. It's actually about twisting into, this is where we're sitting. We see the opportunity here, and we're the better person or party for it. So one of our actions here is based on evidence of things that you're good at. So we tell our power suitors to have a win folder, collect your wins, all the things that you're proud of, like our podcast award. And so the action for this week is write down one thing you're really good at.
I love it. So let's move on. We've owned our story. We've gone through the emotions. We've crafted it. So of course now we have to tell our story. And there are a bunch of ways you're going to be sharing that story. And this is, again, you might be in this situation now. You might be just feeling a bit uncertain. Really doesn't matter where you are. These are all tips that you should be using. It's stuff we put into place all the time. So you might be sharing it in person. You might be at networking events. You might be online and emails. How do you share it?
I love the idea of, in order to tell your story, you need to be amongst people to do it. And you can focus on all sorts of different people to do it. Sometimes we go to our immediate friends, network, peer group, which of course we think is amazing. But often...
Well, they come in handy in owning your story, right?
Yeah.
Like they're the people you really get work through it.
Yes, that telling you what you're good at and help you craft it and test it. But I love this concept of weak ties. And this is the idea that those connections that are 2 to 3 degrees away from your immediate circle, so these are connections of your connections, are often the most powerful career accelerators. And I think I read a stat that 80% of opportunities often come from what is considered weak ties. So connections of connections.
That totally makes sense to me, because when I even think about how we've grown PowerSuit, it's often people we're really close to and their networks have stepped in or heard about us and they've had the advocacy and they know enough about us and so they bring us in. And I just love that idea of everyone in your network has the 150 connections. So the weak ties, they're not more effective because they like you more. They're more effective because you've just exponentially increased the number of contacts you've had when you think about those weak ties. They also, because they're not in your immediate network, are less likely to know that something's happened, that you are now available for work, or that you're open to new opportunities. They may have heard it from your first connections. They may not have. So they're a really good opportunity to chat to and to make aware of the things that are happening in your life, telling your story to them.
Yeah. And so a really great way to start getting in and having some time with those people. We love a good 15-minute virtual coffee chat.
Yeah.
So inviting, hey, would you mind introducing me to someone, or making the direct connection, or reaching out and saying, I know so-and-so, would you be open to a 15-minute coffee chat? Would love to chat to you about XYZ, be really clear. Or I'm in the market looking for this. Can we just have a very quick chat about it? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. And I think at risk of sort of repeating the same advice, which I feel like we do, but it's just great stuff, is use LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Use LinkedIn. Not necessarily tell your full story on LinkedIn, but share knowledge. Integrate in like this thing that I've just learned, or I've just read this article and here's my takeaways, or this is the situation. And the reason why is that you will get likes and comments from people in those 2 to 3 connections away.
Yeah.
So they might be people in your LinkedIn network, but not people you talk to regularly. It opens up another conversation. You can follow up with them then, say, hey, it was so nice to get that comment, blah, 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 and go from there. So just use these things. And we know power suitors who've started doing that. Like, I had a friend who was looking for work a year ago and it was dire. It was a long wait. And so she started posting on LinkedIn and it really worked. She just talked about stuff that was in her wheelhouse, like stuff she was interested in, research that was coming out, laws that were changing. And she found a job really quickly. And I'm not saying it's like A plus B equals C, but it's just that you're just opening up all these extra connections and you're telling your story in different ways, and you're not sticking to a script, but you're integrating some of that stuff in, and it just is so effective.
I'm a huge fan of also asking for what you need as well, because I think humans love helping other humans. And if you put it out there, and we saw this with tech restructures, with other government, public, other private business restructures, is people just said, I've had a wonderful time at this company. You know the environment now. Here's why I'm at. I would love your help in order to connect with people like this. And the comments are unreal. So I'm a huge fan of putting yourself out there and asking for something. And I'm going to experiment with that this week by putting out, we are looking for incredible speakers to interview in 2025 for PowerSuit. So I'm going to put it out on my LinkedIn and PowerSuit's LinkedIn and just say, who do you want to hear from? We want to talk to incredible people. So that is a very explicit ask that I'm hoping will be solved by asking for it on LinkedIn.
If you do know anyone with a very interesting story, we'd love to hear from them.
Please.
But I think on this final one is, I like that idea of putting yourself out there. And I've seen it happen really well on LinkedIn as well, with people even asking their network to post on LinkedIn saying, hey, such and such, I've worked with them before. I want to share with my network to say they're an amazing person at X, Y, and Z. And there's I've actually seen a lot of different tactics working where they're expanding it to their network and all sorts of stuff. So there is, if you are going through a bit of a career curveball, you do actually have a small amount in your control, maybe a large amount in your control, and it may take a bit longer than you hope for, and you may not have chosen this thing, and all of that stuff is true, and life is unfair, and you do have to go through that step 1 of owning your story, but you actually do have some levers you can pull in that, crafting that story and telling that story, that are wildly impactful and often overlooked. And worst case scenario, when you've just had that career curveball, is you turn up in an opportunity situation and you haven't done steps 2 and 3, you haven't crafted that story, you haven't practiced telling it, and you kind of shoot yourself in the foot because you're still in that stage 1. So really, really do think that this, I mean, I've been through it a couple of times and I've worked this theory a couple of times, and it really does help.
And the action for the very last one, which is telling your story, and we'll leave this with you today, is think of one person while you're listening to this to have a virtual or in-person coffee with. This is the coffee rule. People are more likely to say yes to coffee than lunch. Pretty easy to book a coffee. Think of the person's name and then go ahead and book it.
Fabulous.
And I've got just a very quick quote. This is by Anon. And
I love Anon.
Because Anons are really cheesy. And this is, you are the author of your own story. You're not a side character in your own book.
main character energy it.
And thanks, everyone. We will catch you all next time.
Bye.